Storm, Tutoring, and how to become a pro Magic player.
Next on Eternal Turtles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/EternalDirtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me this week, because Phil is gone for a month and a half, we have Bryant Cook from the Epic Storm. Bryant, how are you, man?
I'm great, Zach. Thank you for having me. Being a replacement Phil is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, you're up to at least 2 or 3 of these now.
Yeah. I mean, I like chatting with you. It's always a good time.
Yeah. Well, you know, that brings me to one of the first points I want to bring up is we recently did a tutoring session, and I want to cover some of the stuff you go through in your tutoring sessions. We'll do that a little bit later on, but one of the first things I think we should talk about is let's talk about this is a Storm State of the Union for the Epic Storm.
Okay, so sure, yeah, the Epic Storm. About 6 months ago, can you believe it, was the release of Wilds of Eldraine. And with that set came Beseech the Mirror. And since then, my win rate has just been through the roof. Beseech the Mirror really changed the way that Storm combo decks were built. Pre-Beseech the Mirror, everything was ad nauseum based. Post-Beseech the Mirror, well, you can guess it. Beseech the Mirror is the card. And then from there, the Storm community is trying to figure out what the best plan B is. I happen to think that it's Burning Wish and things like Echo of Aeons, Galvanic Relay, Song of Creation. Some people are liking Bowmasters. Some people still like Infernal Tutor. But really, it's all about Beseech the Mirror. And since then, I've had some pretty good results, Zach.
Yeah. So, well, to the layman, the person who's not constantly playing against or playing Storm, what do you generally do when you Beseech the Mirror? What cards do you generally go get? Eternal Dirtles is sponsored by Tales of Adventure. You can go to toamagic.com, use the code DIRTLES for 5% off your order, and you're going to get that whole order in one package. No more waiting for 5 or 6 or 12 packages to show up at your door so that you can finish your deck. toamagic.com, code DIRTLES for 5% off, and you'll be directly supporting the show.
Okay, so there's a couple of main targets. The primary one that most people would be familiar with is Gaia's Will from Modern Horizons 2. It's a spell with no mana value, so it's just completely blank. It's a sorcery, and then the text on it says, suspend 4. Well, you can't suspend it with Beseech the Mirror, but you can cast it for free. And then the card text reads, you can play artifacts, lands, instants, and sorceries, pretty much all cards, all card types, from your graveyard until end of turn. Anything that would go to your graveyard is exiled. It's just Yawgmoth's Will. That's the easiest way to say it.
Did you ever play Yawgmoth's Will in Standard?
I'm a little too young for that, Zach. I mean, I am old, but I'm a little bit too young for that. I started with Invasion.
I was actually just going to ask how long have you been playing Magic for? There was so during I want to say it was Mercadian Masks. And what's the other set? The Urza Saga sets. People were playing this Yawgmoth's bargain Soul Feast. You would literally like put out what I forget the Scourge, the one that, like you can discard cards from your hand to create mana.
Scourge Familiar. I do know that one.
Scourge Familiar. Yeah. So Scourge Familiar plus Yawgmoth's Will creates you have the same amount of mana as you have life situation because you can draw cards and then discard them. And then you would basically use Dark Ritual and some Radiance Dragoons to like get up like 1 mana in this situation, and like basically trade all 4 of your Soul Feasts from your deck, and then you cast Yawgmoth's Will to like finish the game up.
Nice.
That was
the combo's a little bit better now, Zach. Just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first real Storm deck, if you want to consider it Storm, would have been the Cadaverous Bloom, like Squandered Resources deck.
Mm-hmm.
The first real combo deck that wasn't just Channel Fireball, right? But so you started in Invasion. There weren't any real combo decks in Invasion unless you want to consider Fires of Yavimaya plus Sapperling Burst, a combo deck.
Yeah, well, I was a blue mage for the first handful of years of my life. I played a lot of control decks, tempo decks. I mean, back when MTG The Source was in its prime, I was somebody that posted a lot about Rug Threshold.
Yeah.
So that was, I cut my teeth on playing tempo decks for a long time, and understanding how other decks work just makes you an even better combo player. So
Yeah.
people are always like, oh, I just want to specialize in this one thing. But to really be great, you have to play everything because you need to understand how people are going to attack you, what to expect from them, what they're likely to do, their sort of interaction, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and that's also I mean, advice carries over to all of Magic, but it certainly carries over to combo players and control players specifically because you need to know what you're fighting against, right? You have to
Exactly.
know the metagame to pick the right answers.
So to get back to your original question, Beseech the Mirror targets. So after Guy as well, there's also Galvanic Relay from Modern Horizons 2. Probably my favorite Magic card at this point. It's like a cross between Mind's Desire and Necropotence. So for 2 and a red, you exile the top card of your deck. You can play it on the following turn, and then it has Storm. So it's much easier to cast the Mind's Desire. You get it a little bit later, like Necropotence. It's just a beautifully designed Magic card. And then there's Song of Creation, which is this Temur enchantment from Ikoria, I believe. You can play an extra land. Whenever you cast a spell, you draw 2 cards, and then at the end of your turn, you discard your hand. And this is how you beat Graveyard Hate. And I mentioned Guy as well being a card that there's a lot of graveyard recursion with that card, but there's also Echo of Aeons in the Epic Storm. So you have a lot of ways to abuse the graveyard. So people will bring in things like Leyline to the Void, and then you're like, guess what? Song of Creation, cast
Yeah,
Chrome Mox, draw 2, cast Lotus Petal, draw 2, and before you know it, you're off to the races.
yeah. So where do you put Storm right now in like the tier list? Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield.com. Moxfield is the best deck building website on the internet. You can find all of my and Phil's decks in links below, including decks from this episode. And if you do, you'll be directly supporting the channel.
I'd say it's probably low tier B. Um,
Okay.
yeah, like it's not tier A. I'm not going to pretend that it is. It's a very difficult deck to play properly. People try and they struggle, which brings down the overall win rate because I think Storm is a deck with an incredibly low floor, but a very high ceiling.
Yeah.
So if you're really good at it, you can beat almost anything. But if you're average to below average, it's really tough to win with. So you have to practice a lot in order to get good.
I think a lot of that also, the win rate for that deck is like you must specialize in that deck because buying 4 Lion's Eye Diamonds is not for the faint of heart. So you have to really be dedicated to that plan if you're going to play that deck.
I would agree. However, the most popular way to play Magic on or to play Legacy these days is on Magic Online.
I mean, I was just going to
So
mention that since we are both on the creator pool for Magic Online's creator program.
yeah, but on Magic Online, you could buy the entire Epic Storm deck. Like, let's say you didn't even want to use rental services, which also exist, but if you just wanted to buy the Epic Storm, you can buy it right now for under 300 tickets. So convert that into straight cold hard cash. That's $250. That's less than
That's
a
less than
Lion's
a
Eye
Lion's Eye
Diamond, an
Diamond.
Underground Sea, City of Traders. Like, it's worth less than any of those. So, and you can play in your boxers late at night, whenever you want.
Yeah. So I guess one of the cards that we should talk about in as far as hindrance to your deck is Orcish Bowmasters. How do you work around Orcish Bowmasters?
Oh, I just don't care. Um, so a lot of people think, oh my God, Orcish Bowmasters used to be banned. I understand their point. However, I do think a lot of the people with that opinion are people that have decks that lose to Orcish Bowmasters single-handedly. And they're like, this card's outrageous. But I think if you look at the actual play patterns of the Legacy format, Orcish Bowmasters is completely fine. And then when you look at the win rates of the top decks, like it kind of makes sense that nothing has happened yet. But in regards to the Epic Storm, to answer your question, so you're a deck with Echo of Aeons, and you're a deck with the draw 7 that is going to play into Orcish Bowmasters. They're like, okay, I'll deal you 7, and my Orc army will get bigger. But when you're playing a combo deck and that happens, you're like, okay, well, now I'm going to put Tendrils of Agony on this deck. Your Orc token never mattered. So as long as you have more life than cards you need to draw, it does not matter. Ponder and
Yeah.
Brainstorm, obviously, the setup turns you have to sequence more aggressively than you ever have in the past. So turn 1, you might Brainstorm on your main phase in order to play around an Orcish Bowmaster on their turn 2. Things like that. But also, Veil of Summer stops Orcish Bowmaster triggers. That's a
Yeah.
really important thing to know. But it also stops things like Chalice of the Void or Counterbalance. Sorry, Phil Blackman, and other things like that.
Yeah, I remember during our training session, of course, I got matched up against a storm deck, and you were like, "Yeah, we're not going to get this one, I don't think." But I did get down a Orcish Bowmaster, and they had some creation, so that was their whole plan. Of course, they just drew into their Veil of Summer and got me.
Yeah, it's a pretty common thing. It's not as a big of a deal as people may think. So one of the things is I think when you read things like Reddit or YouTube comments, people are like, "This card is outrageous. I can't believe it's legal." But those people aren't playing lots
They're
of
not in the
Legacy.
trenches, yeah.
Exactly. And if you actually play a lot of games, it's not that bad. But sometimes I think the hive mind gets a little, into their own thoughts, and it's tough because I understand the mob mentality, but sometimes you need to do some critical thinking.
I think one of the great things. So I listened to your podcast, Eternal Glory, and one of the great things about a recent episode you guys had was where you and Brian and Phil were like, "Hey, just a quick gut check. Maybe we're smelling our own farts here." And you went and gut checked and checked yourself on whether or not like Bowmasters, Grief, that whole Riscaminator package was too powerful for the format. And you were like, like everyone's gonna have an opinion on that, but we're using real data. It's not just like a vibe situation.
Yeah, so we released that over a month ago now. We've had a couple episodes since, and the episode after that, we looked at the data at the beginning of that episode and we're like, hey, it's been 2 weeks, let's check back in on the data. Data showed it was trending down. Since that episode, it's continued to trend down. So I think sometimes the way that Legacy's been working ever since the previous ban cycle was that the format has been pretty cylindrical every few weeks. So if you go back 3 months ago, it was all Ancient Tomb Stompy decks. It was that new Goblins deck with Sticker Goblin, it was Moon Stompy, it was Boris Initiative. And now when
Curse
you
on
look
the
at
format.
exactly, and when you look at the top of Goldfish now, those decks are still on the front page, but they've slid down. And then we saw the rise of the bug, uh, control deck, bug beanstalk, whatever you like to call it. And then that deck slid down. We've seen Grixis Tempo at the top. We've seen Rug Delver at the top. Right now we're seeing Riscaminator, but that's starting to slide. That just means that we're in a healthy format. But
Yeah,
people are so used to one deck being on the top and nothing moving that they're like, this isn't right. But no, it is. This is what a good format looks like. I'm sorry to
yeah.
tell
When
you.
there's that sort of rotation of the best deck, what the one thing. So it's the only way I think you can have a healthy legacy format is that rotation. But one of the things I think that it behooves you to do is, maybe not you, but as a general player, is to be able to pivot into other decks that take advantage
Mm-hmm.
of what the meta is presenting to you.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get any disagreements from me, Zach.
I mean, you're just gonna play Storm anyhow, but,
Got to find a way to make it work. But I mean,
yeah,
on my YouTube channel, I play tons of different decks. It's not all just Storm, but understanding other options you have is very important. I mean, I have played other decks before. So if we go all the way back to the snow period of Legacy with Arkham's Astrolabe was legal, many people don't remember this, but I actually won 3 events in a row. I won, or actually four. Okay, so I won a Saturday PTQ at the Epic Storm, and then I won the Sunday Challenge the next day. Back to back first place finishes. The week after that, I won with Rug Delver first place. And then the week after that, I believe it was like second or third place with the 5-color Snowcrow deck. And like sometimes you just have to pivot off to other decks because A, people are going to hate on your deck, or B, the format's so bad for your archetype that you got to play something else. And I mean, I do have the ability to play other things, but if I'm going to spend my time playing Legacy, I want to play what I love. And I think
yeah.
that is one of the nice things of the format.
So the third deck in that category, Rug Delver, that was during Ren and Six era too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you just got all the toys there.
Actually, no, it wasn't Ren and 6. I was playing it during the Oko period.
Still quite good.
Yeah,
obviously,
pretty good.
So let's talk about tutoring, because you offer a tutoring service through the Epic Storm. I took advantage of that and did. My dog's like, yeah, he did. I took advantage of that, and we did a 4 hour session where you sat me down and one, you helped me get Magic Online running on my computer, which was important. But yeah, you really sat me down and kind of gave me a good like tutorial through just what Legacy is right now, and kind of gave me a chance to reset myself as Zach Clark, a player, which was really interesting to me. Do you want to talk more? I would like you to talk more about your tutoring services.
Okay, so let's talk about the situation you were in for a sec. So you came to me, you're like, I really want to do well in this upcoming event. And I know you as one of two things. You're someone who really likes playing Infect, but also tempo decks. And Infect is like a combo tempo deck. I feel you there. And I asked you, well, do you want to win or do you want to play what you like? That was one of the first
Yeah.
questions. And I feel like sometimes that's a very big divide. The people that come to me, they're like, hey, I want to win. And I'm like, okay. And then you ask them what they want to play, and they'll tell you like 5-color Nick Fit or something. It's like, well, that you could win with 5-color Nick Fit or whatever your heart desires, but your odds are lower. And we talked about what your options were. We talked about Grixis Delver. We talked about playing Riskaminator, things that give you a high percentage chance to do well in a large event. And we ended up settling on Grixis Delver because it's a deck that's probably not going to see any bannings. I mean, Orcish Bowmasters is a possibility, but not likely. And we then went in and we're like, okay, we now have a deck. Let's look at the metagame and pick card choices that are going to help us. We looked at the sideboard, we looked at the flex spots of our main deck, and then we started playing games. At the beginning of every game, we talked about like, well, what is this matchup really about? So if you got paired into lands, things like that. And from there, we established game plans of what the game should look like, which helped our mulligan patterns and things like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really helpful was like you were able to confirm a couple things for me. One is that I just need to slow down as a player and like really assess what I'm doing personally in a game. And then two, like we were able to point out some of my strengths. Mulliganing and keeps were like some of the strengths that I had, but like really the thing that session really got for me was just taking my time as a player and realizing what I need to do to just compete on a level that like a good Magic player competes on, because I have just such a massive amount of ADHD that a lot of times I'll just be like, yeah, that resolves, and I look at my hand and I've got like 2 stifles and a force of will, and like I'm just not paying attention. So I think when people are going into those tutoring sessions, one of the things they should do is like kind of have an idea of what they're what they're looking for, but like what a best case scenario is. And when I went into it, my best case scenario was that I was going to get a sort of an action plan for myself to figure out what I should be doing to make myself a better Magic player.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to make fun of you about your playing too fast, but since you already did it, Zach
Yeah.
was just clicking really fast on everything. And I was like, why don't we just slow down a little bit and think about some of these things? And I understand there's a timer when you play on Magic Online. You only have 25 minutes. But, sometimes there's this really interesting article that Brian Bronduin wrote in 2013 or 2014 about how when you sign up for a large Magic event, how you want to make 5 decisions in the entire event, which seems really crazy when you sit there and think about it. You're like, okay, I'm going to play at least, 7 to 9 rounds of Legacy, and that's before a possible top 8, and you want me to make 5 decisions. And if you read the article, he talks about how you should be so comfortable playing your deck that most decisions you can do on autopilot, not put too much brain strength into it. And then throughout the event, there will be 5 decisions that are like, okay, I really need to take a step back here and think about what my opponent could have. How do I close the window on my opponent coming back? Those sort of things. And Zach was kind of just like rushing through pivotal moments of that league. So we were like, hey, why don't we, just slow it down a little bit? We have some time, and let's think about what could possibly beat us here and how we can play around that in the best way possible, given the resources that we have. And that's one of the things we focused on. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when we go into things like one of the biggest things for me was that I haven't gotten in the reps that I'd like to get in, and so getting onto Magic Online just period was important to me. But now that I'm in there much more often, I'm getting those reps in. One of the things I find that I'm doing is taking that advice to heart, and then really like taking the full like 2.5 minutes to be like, okay, well, what are my sideboard decisions? Like, what do I care about? And moving, just playing thoughtfully, which, here's sort of the secret to what I think my bigger issue is. When I moved down to Philadelphia, I sold everything. I basically went down, I got rid of all my duels, I kept my Force of Wills, and that's kind of it as far as what was expensive. So all of my heuristics for like what my decks do. I had 8 cast and Death Shadow. Death Shadow works a lot like Rug Delver, but like it's not the same deck, right? There are some very important decisions that you have to make when you're playing Death Shadow that you don't have to make with Rug Delver. So all of my heuristics went out the window, and because at the time it was during the pandemic, I wasn't getting as many reps in. Uh, because of work, I wasn't even able to mess around with Magic Online, and obviously I wasn't going out to play Magic with people. Um, so one of the things I really need to do was to just get in the driver's seat again and just start playing playing like physical games and digital games. So now that I'm getting those reps in, now I'm playing like a couple leagues a week. It's amazing the amount of improvement you get from just like sitting down and getting in like 4 to 5 times the amount of games in a week.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about my thought process going into events. Do you mind if I
Yeah,
just dive into
yeah,
something that I've been
please,
thinking
yeah,
about? So, uh, Zach was like, "Hey, you top aided a string of events recently. I'd like to talk about that a little bit." And I think that there's like people think that there's a secret sauce. You know, if you've ever seen the movie Space Jam, all the Looney Tunes think that Michael Jordan's water bottle is like something incredible. They're like, "That's it. That's the secret sauce. He's got it." In reality, it's just water. And I mean, I was a '90s kid. I was born in the late '80s, grew up in the '90s, and loved Space Jam. By the way, also big fan of Michael Jordan. And then my name's Bryant, so you can guess that I liked Kobe a lot. And those two incredibly strong worth ethic. Like they talk about, if you ever watch The Last Dance, Jordan would create narratives in his head about things that people never said to him about him. And if you watch it, he's like, I had to put myself in this mental space where it was me against them, so that way I could overcome the challenge and then dominate them. Like he created these just like fictional stories, and that's what he had to do. And if you ever like read or watch anything about Kobe Bryant, after games, if they lost, he'd be in the gym or on the court just shooting hoops all night because he hated losing so much. And to circle this back to Magic, if you want to win, you have to practice a lot, and I don't think people get that. Like going into Eternal Weekend, you can go back. All my data is public, by the way, if you ever want to look at my data spreadsheets. So I keep these spreadsheets of all of my matches that I play, and they're all available at theepicstorm.com/data. And I probably played 250 to 300 matches in the 3 to 4 weeks before Eternal Weekend. And I needed, hit that court, shoot some free throws, make sure that everything I knew about the format hadn't changed, get all that rust off, and really putting in the work is the best thing. There is no secret sauce. Like if you want to win, you have to put in the time. And it's not just practice. Like you can practice all day. You might go 0-3. So you have to make good decisions with your sideboard choices, with your deck selection, things like that. Because in Magic, there is a little bit of luck involved, just like sports. Like you have to sink the shot, right?
yeah,
But really, it's about work ethic. And I think that sometimes some people want it more than others. I posted this thing on Twitter about there's somebody who was like, how do you manage having a full time job, a family, content creation, all this other stuff you do? And the secret is, I don't sleep as much as I should.
yeah.
So if I want to play, a League of the Epic Storm at night, I'm doing it after, the wife and kid have gone to sleep. It's 11 p.m. I'm starting this league. I'm probably ending close to 1 a.m. and then I'm waking up at 6 to, take the kid to daycare, that sort of thing. Like, if you want to be great, you have to put in the work. That's my message.
Yeah, and that was where you are now with your work ethic is where I was just before you started playing Magic. I had a year between high school and college where I just took off and was like, I'm going to be a pro Magic player, which is not something I would tell people to do. But I was up until 4 a.m. every night at the like local Denny's drafting, doing Rochester drafts because Worlds was Rochester drafts. And so
Hmm.
one of my friends had gotten into Worlds, and you get to invite your own team. So I was like on the like going to Worlds in Belgium, I think it was at the time. This is the Kai Buddha John Finkel like finals Worlds, and I was up constantly. Just we when we weren't eating, we were playing Magic, which we can talk about mental health and that sort of stuff. But I think you're at the end of the day, you're right. If you want to be good at this game, you do have to kind of eat, sleep, and breathe it for at least the period of time you're going into a big event like that.
I would agree. Yeah, for sure.
So we've talked about the pro plan. We've talked about the tutoring sessions. We've talked about the epic storm. But let me get a little bit deeper into talking about the Eternal Glory podcast. So, most people that are watching this obviously know that you are 1/3 of the Eternal Glory podcast with Brian Koval and Phil Gallagher. Can you tell me? Let's get a quick origin story. How did that come to be?
So the Eternal Glory podcast was originally just me chatting. Well, okay, well, let's actually rewind a little bit further. So I used to join Leaving a Legacy constantly. They'd be like, "Hey, we need a guest. Do you want to hop on in?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, sure." So I did it a couple times, and I felt like our chemistry was really good. Jerry, me, Pat Uglow, those were the two hosts of Leaving a Legacy, and we just had a good give and take. And before you knew it, within a couple months, I had been a guest 5 or 6 times. And after one episode, Pat was like, Bryant, you're pretty good at this. You should consider your own podcast. And I was like, yeah, maybe one day. He's like, no, Bryant, really, like you should consider it. So I started talking to Wilson Hunter and Anurag Das, and we were like, yeah, maybe we'll do this. So we started, and then I continued guesting on Leaving a Legacy a little bit. And they're like, Bryant, you have your own podcast now. Just go do that. Um, so I started with Wilson and Anurag, and a lot of people like to dramatize what happened when the reality is that Wilson had his third kid, maybe fourth kid. He's like, I just don't have time for this anymore.
Yeah.
And, Wilson had to, go take care of his family. And then Anurag and I, there was no falling out or anything like that. He's just like, I want to try other things. And I was like, yeah, dude, go for it. And so I found two new co-hosts. I found Phil Gallagher and Brian Koval. And honestly, I am super thankful all of that ever happened. Some people want to pretend that it's like this spiteful thing. It's really not. I can't imagine where my life would be right now without meeting those two. I didn't really know Brian before the Eternal Glory podcast, and I barely knew Phil. Phil had messaged me a couple times about like thravenuniversity.com and stuff like that, but we weren't really friends. And the three of us working together, we all sort of went on the YouTube journey at the same time. And we bounced ideas off each other. We learned about the algorithm together, and we found what did and did not work. And all three of our channels exploded. I probably was more the technical person, learning more about search engine optimization, aka SEO, and how to tie together some of those things that make it so when you search Legacy Storm combo, I'm the first one that shows up, not because I'm Brent Cook, but because I put all of that search engine optimization stuff into all of my articles, videos, things like that. So when you search Legacy Fluctuator, you're going to see Brent Cook Legacy Fluctuator, Brian Koval Legacy Fluctuator, even before bigger names like LSV might record it. We're going to show up first because of that and stuff like that, which has made our channels grow. And I'm just so thankful that all three of us, went on the YouTube journey together at the same time, not even counting the podcast stuff, but love those guys.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so then you guys just start, from there you just decided to like combine forces and go. This is almost what 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, I want to say.
I'm not sure.
Based on the number of episodes you have in the 52
so
weeks
we have
of the year.
122 now. We do every 2 weeks. And they joined episode 18 or 19. So I think it's 3 or 4 years at this point, if I'm being honest.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Not the most prolific podcast out there, but I honestly, I think pound for pound, you guys give the most salient information on the format at that time. I like to consider Eternal Durdles as like the zeitgeist of the format, but honestly, like I would give that if that was a badge I could give to somebody, I would give that to you guys because you guys are right on top of what is actually happening in the format at any one point in time.
I appreciate that.
Well, so to that end, I think we got a pretty good idea of where Storm is, what Storm's doing right now. I just love I love like talking about the tutoring sessions because God, I was a mess, but at the same time. At the same time, I learned so much, which was a real blast. One of them was you brought up earlier was about how Orcish Bowmasters doesn't matter so much. I found myself siding out Orcish Bowmasters like every match. It seemed like.
Yeah, I mean, they're really for specific matchups. They're not the boogeyman that people think. But to rewind a little bit to
Mm.
earlier on in the episode, you've called me a pro twice now. I wouldn't consider myself a pro. I'm probably a more likely content creator at this point, but legacy pros don't really exist. In fact, pro
Yeah,
magic
well, this is
barely
true.
exists now.
Well,
And I
this is
think
why I can call you a pro. I feel like it's a word we can just throw around.
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you go back and look at, 2013, Legacy was at the height on the SEG tour. There was the Saturday opens and the Sunday opens, and SEG was streaming these massive, 10, 11 round Legacy events all day long. Terrific commentary from Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan. And they did a really good job of selling people on the dream. And that was to
Yeah.
be on the Pro Tour. I mean, watching SEG got me to want to play in standard opens. My first two SEGs were actually SEG standard top eights with blue, white, Delver, and standard. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do this Pro Tour thing. And I, played in a bunch of PDQs, stuff like that. And they made you want to care about the SEG tour, but also the Pro Tour. And at the time, I mean, I was in college and, post college, and I was like, well, I'm not making that much money as a graphic designer. Maybe I could do Pro Magic. And I'm glad I stuck with graphic design, which taught me about coding and then web development and all this other sort of stuff. But I mean, I thought about the Pro Tour too. And after seeing what happened with organized play, I am so glad I did not choose that direction in life because it would have gone south pretty quickly. But they did a really good job at selling the dream, and then that dream was cut short. So a lot of young people out there that bought into that dream of maybe I won't go to college, maybe I'll try to be a pro magic player, they got burned.
I got burned so bad. Yeah, it's funny because so I did that panel with Morrow at MagicCon Chicago where we were talking about all the media over the last 30 years of the game. And one of the things I remember, I just recall like that was the dream is just like every single article you read in the Duelist or in like Scry or Inquest was like, oh, these are the decks for the Pro Tour or whatever. And it's so funny how over the past 30 years, like the dream of the Pro Tour has, or even like what you consider to be successful in Magic, obviously very personal thing, but what the masses consider to be like the thing to do has changed completely, and I would say more now than before. It's about like making relevant content for a lot of people, as opposed to like you used to win a tournament and then you would get onto like SCG and you would rank for SCG or something like that. And that was the real prize of like winning one of those things. Like you get a chunk of money on the front end, but then you would have like this writing gig that you could do. And now it's more about like you go from writing for magazines to writing for a website like Hipsters of the Coast is a good example, right? Now it's all independent people, like yourself and me doing content creation. So it's wild how much that's changed.
Yeah, I think the part of it is like the advent of Twitch. Twitch really took off.
Yeah.
And with it, I wish I was earlier on the wave, if I'm being honest. Caleb Durward decided very early, hey, I am making more money on Twitch than I am going to SEG Opens. And then shortly after that, Jeff Hoogland adopted that. And those two, massive streamers at this point. I mean, say what you want about whoever, but those two definitely got on the wave at the right time and then rode it out. During the pandemic, a lot of people decided they wanted to be content creators. And I had already been in it, but I wasn't as dedicated to YouTube at the time. And being home all the time during lockdown, it gave me a lot of time to figure out who I was in the space, but also to refine my craft. If you go back,
Yeah.
so my first ever video I uploaded was a video New Year's Eve 2017. So the next day would have been 2018. And it's just like completely unedited, me with bad audio, just like sitting in front of Magic Online going like click, barely talking.
Yeah.
That's still up on the channel. And then over time, I refined my craft a little bit. But it wasn't until the pandemic hit that I even started editing the videos. Up until that point, 3 years later, it was still just me uploading non-edited content straight to YouTube. And for some reason, people watched it.
Yeah.
But over, the last 4 years, I've gotten better at editing. I've learned some animations in Adobe After Effects. How to edit in Premiere better. I mean, by trade, I'm a graphic designer. I've built some banner ads in my life, but at this point, I'm a web developer. And I think working in an ad agency for 9 years helped me with a lot of this stuff, from writing email subject lines to YouTube videos, they're actually pretty similar. SEO is a big part of it that I learned at an ad agency, how to design YouTube cover photos, stuff like that. And I really learned a lot of different traits that made me successful at YouTube. But it wasn't all just like, hey, graphic designer does this. It's I learned a lot of different things that all ended up, being pretty useful.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can glean just by, being out there and doing it, but then like seeing what other people are doing, or, occasionally just having somebody on your show and be like, this is how a thumbnail should be. I think
Hmm.
you did that for me. Had to be a little over a year now when last time Phil took a break. It might have been 2 years ago even. But you were like,
Why are
this
you letting
is
him take breaks?
yeah. I don't know, but I'm gonna get a good break pretty soon. But yeah, like it's almost so obviously slightly less successful journey, but very similar. When we put up our, we were a podcast, we just did audio content, and I was like, guys, I think that we need to start putting out videos. Like I think videos where people are going to be consuming content.
Hmm.
And it's also like you can't really get like I want to get a preview card or something. You want to be recognized by WotC, in some
No,
capacity.
I
I
still
think.
haven't received one, so
Yeah.
you
So
might be
yeah,
ahead of
okay,
me
you're
there.
you're on the same path as I am as far as that's concerned. But you can't do that with like just an audio podcast. I feel like if you're writing articles, if you're producing visual content, you can do it there, obviously. But video is I think really where you want to go if you want to kind of grow in the space as a content creator. Be that gameplay content, be that live podcast content, that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, I think the most successful creators are doing video. Just because it's the top level of the thing you can create. Like we don't have a 4D experience where like someone can come into your home and show you how to play the game, right? So I think video is just like where it's at. And we were putting out like I was just like, here's Phil's phone, here's my phone. We were video ourselves on our iPhones, right? And then Phil would send that to me, and then I would edit that with the audio we got from the podcast and turn that into a thing. And our lighting was terrible, for what it's worth, Phil's lighting is still pretty terrible, but he's got a much smaller place than mine. I have dedicated an entire room to podcasting. He's living in New York. It's a smaller pad.
Yeah, I mean,
But
Astoria is just not as large as Philly,
yeah, it's
when in regards to like living spaces.
yes, yeah. So but it's all those little like incremental steps where you just like continue to improve, figure out ways that you can make a better experience for the people watching your content, and having a background in SEO and stuff like that helps. I have a photo background. I was a wedding photographer for half a decade, for I guess a little over a decade. Um, so I had the background as far as the understanding Photoshop, and then I was like, okay, I can translate that into learning Premiere, and Premiere is basically just four-dimensional Photoshop once you really break it down, and like being able to like kind of piece together your experience and translate that into usable usable information that you can make your content better is kind of where you want to be.
To rewind to what you said there. So you were talking a little bit about YouTube covers in the start of that. So one thing that I learned at my last job was accessibility into regards to design. So you want things to have a certain contrast ratio, which sounds, like non-important things, but websites at the beginning of the pandemic were actually being sued for not being accessible. So someone with a visual impairment couldn't see the contrast of a button enough. And then, so there's actually two major ones. Little Caesars was sued, and then so was Dunkin' Donuts, and they both had to make accessible websites. And you might be thinking it's only color ratios, like don't put an orange on top of a red. Yeah, that's roughly what it is. But there's actually ADA, who's like one of the bigger
Yeah.
accessibility, guidelines. So it's not just colors; it's also, and that's how I got my current job. Actually, is that I understood the coding behind accessibility as well. So when someone that has a visual impairment uses the tab key to go through a site, and they hover over the buy now button, someone using a screen reader, that button will read to them, this is buy now button or whatever the button says. And I do a lot of that coding. So I make the websites a little bit better for people using them. And I'm currently recoding the Epic Storm for that. And
Okay.
then you started talking about, Premiere and stuff like that. I wasn't super familiar there, but one of the things about it is it does take a long time to render sometimes. And people on our, if you go to the Eternal Glory podcast YouTube channel, all of the videos, so we upload one that's an hour and a half for supporters, then one that's about an hour for non-supporters. And each one of those videos takes about 20 minutes to render, and it's just an audio file and an image. So
Yeah,
if we were to, cut photos and all this stuff to put in every single card we talk about, it would take hours, not to
yeah,
mention
it
the
does.
editing in order to make that happen. And people are like, why doesn't your podcast have video? I mean, to your credit, Zach, you do an amazing job.
I
Brian, Phil,
appreciate
and
that.
I, we have very
You
busy lives. Like
you got
all of
other
us
stuff
have,
going on. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
exactly.
And you
And
guys
I'm
are
not
playing Magic sometimes.
exactly.
You know,
And I'm not saying
you
that
have
you
to take
don't,
that apart.
but
You
it's
know.
just like we have personal channels, we have the podcast, we have family, all that stuff. Like it's really tough to find time on top of everything else to edit a video. And I mean, I think you do a really good job at making it happen.
It is a
But I
literal
think
full
that
time job on top of my full time job for sure.
exactly, like it's a lot of work. And just, making content, it's not super rewarding financially. I mean, I think that it's really rewarding as a legacy creator to give back to the format that I
Yeah,
love. But monetization wise, it's not always there. And it really is a labor of love.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think and I said this. I just had a conversation with uh, Rich Stein from Hipsters of the Coast, and we're talking about like getting the band back together, as it were. And one of the things I had always said is like all I ever wanted was a void to shout into. Like that's all I ever wanted out of content creation. Like having some of it being reimbursed to me is nice, but really I just want to have a space where I can get the thoughts out of my head to say the things about the game that I love and I have been playing for almost 30 years now.
Hmm.
That to me, that's the reward of doing all this. Doing a good job also just makes me feel like I'm getting some value out of it because I can look at my progress over time, especially like you were saying going back to your earlier videos and stuff like that. Every time I cut a video, there's some improvement made, right? And I can look back, like a year ago and say, okay, here's what I was doing a year ago, and that sort of is like a sort of a visual diary for me. And that's I've been blogging since I think like 2009. I was a rock and roll blogger for like local rock music, and I have that like diary from like that time all the way up to now of like content I've been creating in some space or another. And to me, that's like the biggest thing to me is like just having some sort of a diary of like what you've been through as a person in life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you go back, so when I was really young, I used to write on MTG The Source all the time. And I really valued that community because I was a kid. I mean, lower middle class is what my family was. And
Right
I
there
didn't
with
have a
you.
lot of money. And I would read MTG The Source all day for hours. Didn't matter the deck. I would just read it for hours trying to absorb information. And I was so thankful that all of it was free. And then the website sort of exploded. And around 2013, I decided that I just didn't like MTG The Source anymore, and I was going to make theepicstorm.com. I was a web designer at that time, and I was, you know what, I can build a website. I can put all of my content on this website. I'm going to make it happen. And you can Wayback Machine the first versions of that site. It is hideous. But I mean, I made a website happen. I started bringing all of my old articles, tournament reports from the MTG, the source, to my website. And if you go to the very first post on the Epic Storm, it's actually like 2007 versions, tournament reports about the Epic Storm back when I used to run like Priest of Gix and stuff like that. So a long, long time ago. The Epic Storm has come a long way, but my early writing is in there. It's not very good, but writing over and over made me a much better writer. And same thing happened with video. I think written media about Magic the Gathering is kind of tough these days. Not too many
Yeah,
clicks in written media, but it's still a nice art form for those that do it. It's just it's tough to get the views on those nowadays
it is
compared
a
to
meditation now for me.
yeah.
That's just how it is.
Like like to go back to the height of the SCG era, I used to refresh SCG every single day to see what new articles were out. And it'd be like 4 articles a day, like terrific content. And I think you're really lucky now to get anything of that quality now once a week out of any of the websites because everything is video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild how that changed just kind of like almost overnight. Like there was like I feel like there was just like a pivotal moment where like all content that was that was really good went from like, oh, we're just going to write about this, into like now it's just like boom, now it's all video. And it's also funny the different styles of writing that existed uh, for a while, because you had like those travel log, like, tournament report situations. But like when people really dug down into theory, that was like my bread and butter. I loved reading that stuff.
So I think that light switch that you're talking about is Wizards of the Coast killing organized play. So you had some of the best minds in all of Magic the
Yeah,
Gathering no longer being incentivized to write about Magic the Gathering. And then you got people like me making videos after that during the pandemic, where I like to think that I'm at least decent at this game. I am not Paulo Vitor Damaderosa. He is incredible, probably the greatest player of our generation. People like to talk about John Finkel. Finkel is also amazing, but crushed people during a much easier time period
yeah,
at Magic. And Paulo did in a much more competitive era. And I'm not as good as Paulo, but Paulo quit writing articles on how to be great and how to bluff properly during that time period, and sort of just went, got married, and had a life. And well, I try to provide entertainment, and sometimes I have some pretty good thoughts. I'm not Paulo. And I think that's where a lot of that went from the written stuff over to video. And then during the MPL, the Magic Player League, I think it was called, they started
yeah,
incentivizing the people that they were paying, because they were offering $75,000 a year to 24 pros to start streaming Magic the Gathering and making content. So these people that were previously writing articles for things like Star City Games or Channel Fireball, that were getting pretty good at writing, were told, no, you need to stream now on Twitch. That is what we want you to
yeah,
do. You have to stream Arena on Twitch and we'll pay you $75,000 a year. So you had people that didn't have a lot of experience creating Twitch content being thrown into this pool because Wizards was offering them money. And
yeah.
some of them were better than others. I'll say there's a couple people that I really respect and admire. They were terrible streamers. They would
Yeah.
just sit in front of and be like, no talking.
Click, click, click.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You can do that if you're like a speed
Hmm.
runner, right? Like like for showing off a game, but like you really have to have a personality for Magic the Gathering. You need to be selling a little bit of what you are, or what the game's about, or at least explaining your plays. You know, uh,
Exactly.
what's an interesting thing to think about is that you know videos, like I don't go back to watch videos several times, right? Like I have read some articles, I have read over and over. The classic is Who's the Beatdown, right? I've read Who's the Beatdown like 100 times, right? But I imagine if that was a video that Mike Flores put out in like 1998 or whenever it came out, right? I think it wouldn't have had the longevity it had. It boasts now, because it would have been a flash in the pan, a different era, obviously, but I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, so two things. One, I don't think I'm that charismatic or charismatic at all. And I'm also a little bit monotoned. So the fact that I have a relatively successful YouTube channel always shocks me a little bit, because like I am not Anurag Das. Like that guy, he's, great personality, all that stuff. I'm just like a kind of boring white guy. And I really appreciate everyone that watches my content, but I'm not as good as I could be. I'll say that. And then the second thing is regarding written media. There was an article that was released in 2011. It happened right after I graduated college. And honestly, Zach, I'm not bullshitting you when I say this. It changed my life. So
Okay.
Pat Chapin, love or hate the guy for whatever reasons you want, he wrote an article about language. And in it, he was asked to commentate for Wizards of the Coast on some event.
I
And
know. I
on
know this
coverage,
article.
he said some words that maybe he shouldn't have, that were pretty acceptable within the gaming community at that time.
Yeah, I believe
And
it was the R
afterwards, some
word
people,
specifically. Yeah.
yeah, um, some people contacted him and were like, "Do you know what that word means?" And he's like, "Yeah." Well, they're like, "Well, why are you using it in relationship to a children's card game?" And Pat Chapin went on to talk about, how gamers use language. And at that moment, I was a kid fresh out of college. I was using a lot of gamer language, completely changed how I approached the world. And I just started changing my vocabulary almost immediately. I felt so ashamed of who I was on MTG The Source and all those things I said, when I was just like a naive 14, 15, 16-year-old kid on that forum. And I was just like, I can't believe I talk that way. And, removing those words from my vocabulary and stuff like that. And it hit me really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't know if like somebody preaching at a camera would have hit me as hard as that article did.
Yeah.
I
I
believe it's
was.
called "Words Mean Things" by Pat Chapin.
Yeah, that's a great article. I was very fortunate that when I started Hipsters of the Coast, I surrounded myself with people that would check me, and I was certainly one of those people that would say the R word and stuff like that. And I was very fortunate that people around me were like, "Hey, man, like, what are you doing? Like, come on." And like I got that like take you to the curb and explain to you moment once or twice by people, and it changed my life. And then I think I read that article by Pat Chapin, and I was like, wow, yeah, that's exactly what I experienced. And it like, yeah, that is a change your life article. And I feel like, yeah, that's a perfect example too of like magic content that you just can't get. Like somebody saying that on camera would not have had the impact, right? And it also wouldn't have been watchable. Like you'd just been like, what am I reading right now? Like, what am I watching right now? Because when you do a video like that, it comes off as super preachy and a little holier than thou. And that article did a very good job of bringing you to the level of somebody who thinks the same way you do, probably, and says like, look, we can be better. Like, and I think you also humbling himself while he was doing that, to just be like, look, I'm the one making that problem in the community, and I'm going to change. I just perfect example of the difference between written and video content.
Yeah, so you talked about something there, surrounding yourself by people that will check you. I am so fortunate that my magic friends are not, for lack of a better term, fanboys. Like, you'll meet people and they're like, oh, I'm such a big fan, and they'll try to become your best friend immediately. And hey, I appreciate that you love the
Yeah,
content, I really do. But like, if you want to be friends, and this is just for me, I'd rather you treat me like a normal person.
yeah,
And yeah, crazy, right? And I'm fortunate in the fact that like Alex McKinley has put up with me for years. And one of the reasons that I value Alex so much is that he lets me know when I'm wrong. And I'll be like, hey, I have this idea, or this is what I think about this. And sometimes Alex will just be like, no, Brian, that's not the way it works. And it's not always about a card interaction. It might be something in the real world or an opinion that I have. And Alex is always there to let me know, hey, that's not how it is, or whatever. And I really value that from him. And I mean, I've made Alex a much better Magic player in return, just like hours of Discord calls. And at the start of
yeah,
the pandemic, we used to hang out on Google Hangouts like every night, like seven of us would play leagues together. And Alex went from someone who thought that a Braid should be a main deck card in combo decks to probably the second best Epic Storm player. And I mean, I'm not who I'm so great at all that stuff, but like truly, Alex is really, really good, and that's my point here. And he's put in the work over the last, 5+ years to become insanely good, but also a really good friend of mine. And Alex, I don't say it enough, but I appreciate you.
yeah. That's awesome. I think I was fortunate in that when I came back I took a 12-year hiatus from Magic the Gathering. When I left the game, I would have been starstruck meeting like John Finkel or Kai Buddha or Ole Rade. I would have been starstruck. But I took those 12 years off. I became an adult. I went from like 20 to 32. So long. That's a whole life. There. But I worked in the fashion industry for just enough time to meet enough real celebrities and see what kind of a crappy person so many of them are. Nobody strikes me anymore.
Yeah.
And
So a really important interaction I had going back to early Star City Games era was I was watching Jerry Thompson play a mirror match. So he had won the week before with the first iteration of Shardless Bug. I don't know why I forgot the word bug there. Shardless Bug. So Deathrite Shaman, Shardless Agent, you hit Ancestral Visions, you play Tarmogoyf Jace, the Mind Sculptor, Hem to Torok, all this stuff. So
Blue
Jerry
Jund, as they
crushed the
call
week.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So crushed the SEG. The next week he has a mirror match round one. And he's getting dominated by this person that barely knows how to tap their cards. And like, for example, they have a Jace the Mind Sculptor in play. Jerry has one card in hand and like a Tarmogoyf on the table. They him to Torok Jerry, discarding that one card, and then goes, I'll Jace unsummon your Tarmogoyf pass. Like stuff like that. And at the end of the match, I'm just like dumbfounded, and I'm talking to Sam Rukas about it. And all of a sudden, Jerry comes up to talk to Sam Rukas, and I'm like, Sam knows Jerry Thompson? And then he's just like, yeah, what? And they're like, he's like asking Sam about his day, like nothing to do with the match at all. And I was just like, man, that was a crazy match. Like, I can't believe that, like, you really outplayed them, that sort of thing. And then he was just like, Brian, do you know how much Magic the Gathering I play? a single match means nothing to me. He's like, I'll just win the next ones. And I was like, that is like, it blew my mind because at that time I was so spiteful. I wanted to win every match. I needed to win
Oh,
every
dude.
tournament. And Jerry was just like this humble person with a really positive attitude. And that stuck with me for a long time. And sometimes I think about that where I also read all of Jerry's articles. I thought he was like the greatest. And he really humbled me. Like he was one of those like people where it's like, oh, you meet your hero, but like Jerry was actually just fantastic.
I used to shake with rage when I was losing as a teenager. Like because I just like I was a teenager, so I just assumed I was better than everybody. But I remember like and the team of people that I surrounded myself with, talking about the people that I surrounded myself with as an adult were not good people. I got banned for 5 years from this game because I surrounded myself with really shitty people, and and not only were they bad for me in that respect, we were also hyper competitive, and every single play mistake we used to crap on each other for. So like having one person like that around would have probably changed my life. And luckily moving on from there and then having time away from the game and then coming back as an adult and being like, I want to do something good for this game because I did something bad initially. Like just coming in with a completely different mindset. And again, being able to surround yourself with people that don't suck help.
I do think part of it was the era too. Like it
Yeah,
used to be like a badge of honor that you could like rules lawyer someone to win a match. And like that sort of era of
yeah.
magic is past, but that's how it was then. So it's easy to look back now and be like, oh wow, we were all terrible. But like at the time, getting your opponent
That
on
was a
an
cool
missed
guy thing to
exalted
do.
trigger.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's
yeah,
like, oh, you attack, but you didn't announce your exalted trigger. You didn't get that. I'll block with my 3/3 Wild Mikado. It dies. My turn? Like that
yeah.
was like how it worked. I remember being at a Grand Prix, and my one of my friends that I drove there with was playing Stoneblade with Flusterstorm in it, and they had announced that if you don't announce storm triggers or exalted triggers, like they just don't happen.
Yeah.
So, but a
Oh, what a
change in
dumb
game
era.
state must have happened. So, like my friend was so proud that he flusterstormed, or his opponent flusterstormed one of his cards. He then fetched to change the game state. So that way something had happened, and then goes, "I'll pay the one you didn't announce your storm trigger. My spell resolves." And like that was like the highlight of his weekend.
Yeah.
Nobody would be proud to get away with that these
No,
days,
no, God, I
but
would probably
it's just
concede to
like
my opponent seeing that happen. Be like, I'm sorry, man.
there
Yeah,
was
I
an
remember a
event
guy
that I
got me
still
with
feel.
surgical extraction, where like I removed all the grizzle brands from his yard in IRL, uh, and obviously targeted the grizzle brand in his graveyard. Like, why wouldn't I? You're attempting to exhume it, and then he's like, "Are we good?" I'm like, "Yeah," and he's like, "I'm going to continue to try and get this out of the graveyard." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? What's going on right now?"
Yeah, at Grand Prix Louisville, I still feel bad about this sometimes. I'll think about it every once in a while. Where I was in round nine to make day two, and I'm playing against Rug Delver at the time that had Deathrite Shamans in it, Delver Secrets, Young Pyromancers, all that stuff. And I have like 12 Goblin tokens. My opponent has two Deathrite Shamans and two unflipped Delver Secrets. I have lethal on board, but if for some reason they flip both Delver Secrets and find a black source, they have no hand at all. So they'd have to flip exactly Ponder or Brainstorm and find a black source. That's the only way our opponent wins. So our opponent flips Ponder, uses their volcanic island, finds Underground Sea, taps all four of their creatures at once. Doesn't announce any targets, just taps them all. And I go, okay, I will block Deathrite Shaman and Deathrite Shaman. I'll take 6. I go to like 3 life or whatever. Clearly, they meant that they were activating their 2
Yeah, of
Deathrite
course.
Shamans.
Yeah,
And instead, I go, I'll block. My opponent's like, no, clearly I'm activating them. We call a judge. Judge agrees with me. I make day 2. My opponent doesn't. And, I still think about that sometimes. I'm like, that was not a very nice thing I did. I
no,
don't know if I do it today. Maybe I would. Who knows? But I still feel a little guilty about that.
yeah. I mean, it shows the fact that you remember that play shows that you're probably not a scumbag.
I don't know. Who knows?
Because what happens is if you are, you're like, I do that all the time. Like I don't have that one memory. It's just a play that I make. Uh, you know, if you can have like even a day nightmare about a play you've made that you were a kind of a scumbag about. That probably shows that you err towards the side of good as opposed to evil. I feel like.
So on the opposite side of that, this happened at a Star City Games Invitational in 2011. My opponent, who was a very big pro player at the time, was on Maverick, and I'm in the middle of winning game two, and I cast Dark Ritual, and they go, "What does that do?" And I say, "Adds 3 block." They immediately call a judge over because my cards are Japanese and say that I didn't give them an accurate description of Dark Ritual and they want me disqualified. And so I'm like, what? And so the judge goes, "You want an Oracle text on Dark Ritual?" They're like, "No, my opponent's giving me a different definition of what his cards do." And they go, "Dark Ritual adds 3 block. Anything else?" I went on to win that game, but unfortunately lost game number three. And I think about that now when I see their tweets sometimes. I'm like, you really tried to scum me in like the worst way possible. Because it wasn't just like, oh, my opponent fumbled something. It was like, no,
Yeah.
you tried to get me disqualified from a tournament because I used short-term slang about what a card did.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so I don't know.
what was the 3 black mana?
Like
Is
the
it,
judge was just like, Dark Ritual adds 3 block. Anything else? Like that's what they said.
yeah. That's ridiculous. Well, that's like every now and again the surgical extraction guy is a vendor, so I see him sometimes, and I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So anyhow, we're reaching the end of the show. Brian, this has been a blast, man. It's always great to have you on, even to just wax intellectual about the format itself. But it was a blast, kind of tripping down memory lane with you as well.
I appreciate that. So the next time Phil Blackman decides to skip school or whatever, feel free to call me.
Will do. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribe to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.